What do we do? What do we do when everything we thought we knew gets turned upside down? How do we respond when the things we'd considered normal suddenly aren't? When we have to unlearn, relearn, reevaluate, maybe in ways that scare us all the way down to our core? How do we respond when it is not only the outside world that has to change or that is changing, but when we also have to recognize that the external and the internal are inextricably linked? It is easy to hear this story, and I have heard this so many times. The story of Aaron's big screw up. The story of a faithless people for whom multiple divine acts weren't enough. But that lens keeps the story at something of a distance from our stories, here and now. When we join the Israelites in that 32nd chapter of Exodus, we have to remember that it hasn't really been that long since the Exodus from which the book takes its name. The Israelites are still in Sinai. They are still fairly close to Egypt at this point. But more importantly, they are still becoming accustomed to this new life. Freedom from the work of slavery, though not necessarily from the ethics and the mindset of oppression. Egypt is still very present to them, and it turns out that they carried a lot of Egypt with them, tangibly and not. They long for the familiar rhythms, the values that were their life for generations. In a way, I get it. I think we all get it. It's hard to change. When you've been coerced into a particular way of being, when you've been convinced that that way of being is normal, even when it is, as it is in this case, a forced rhythm of endless productivity, of having your worth measured only in how much you can accomplish and in how much work you can do so that the powerful remain powerful. It's hard to change when the coercion did not begin with your generation, when it was all you knew from your earliest awareness, when it was so familiar as to seem objectively normal. Even dehumanizing patterns such as the one that the Israelites experienced in Egypt settle themselves within us, eat away at us until we believe in them, until the voice inside us, that little one right back here that just whispers all sorts of stuff to us, until the voice inside us whispers in the voice of the oppressor about our own unworthiness, until that little voice whispers in our own voice. The concept of worth, the concept of merit, as unhealthy as they are in that context, and those become our reality, intended or not. How much do the voices of oppression, dehumanization become normal in our ears and in our hearts, such that we contort ourselves to living in ways that prove our worth by unjust but familiar metrics, such that we internalize those measures and apply them to others without another thought? It has not been long since the Israelites crossed the Red Sea, the Reed Sea, whatever it was that separated them from the empire of Egypt. And a few weeks, a few months of hearing a different message than the one that they'd known for generations, what difference is that going to make? A few plagues, a couple of miracles, seas parting and food appearing from nowhere are only going to begin the work of quieting that soul-sucking, fear-driven whisper, that clever voice that makes even the grace of God a questionable commodity, that turns more humane ways of being into a terrifying wilderness. And really, how worthy could we be if we're in the wilderness at all? If we're wandering, frightened, seemingly alone? How worthy could we be if nothing we experience in this wilderness place fits our familiar measures of goodness? I think we all know the place of wondering whether we really are worthy, whether our surroundings don't speak to some level of divine punishment, whether the love we've known would actually be present if all of the deepest corners of our hearts were actually laid open, if our authentic selves were fully known, if we didn't have to prove our worth every day to a world that would prefer we uphold the status quo even at the cost of our souls. The Israelites out in the wilderness are wondering, as I think we would, maybe as I think we have, although we often don't admit it, if the God who has been listening to them whine pretty much this entire time, the God unto whom they have dumped all their fears, is really going to be the God who will stick by them. Or if God's apparent withdrawal, taking Moses along, isn't a sign of an expected abandonment. They are wondering, as we ourselves might, whether God doesn't measure by the same scales that we do, the ones that seem normal to us, even if they make us really uncomfortable, and even if they make us feel really, really small. As much as we tend to blame them, to pass judgment and scoff at their lack of faith, is it any wonder that the Israelites took these familiar signs of worth, the gold that had always marked those of status and power, the rings from the women, the boys, the girls, all of the people who wore gold rings in their bodies, make a symbol of their own worth, their own power, a symbol that could not call into question their inherent value, a symbol that could not look beyond the facade, a symbol that could not abandon them. The thing about making an idol is that it does not ask anything of us. It shows us only that which we want to see. It reflects only that which we put into it. An idol is a physical projection of our fear and our need for control, whereas worshiping God requires us to trust in our own authentic selves, to know that our deepest, most vulnerable selves is exactly where we find the image of the divine. Idols take the ways of the world, the oppressive power structures, the rigid norms, the unjust metrics on which we base worth and dignity, and put a veneer of God over them. Justify us in our limited, coercive understandings that prioritize conformity above all. Idols take our desire for comfort, for the security of pattern, and wrap them in the language of nature, of familiarity, of tradition, and of ease. Idols make our lives easier, unexamined, which is perhaps why we create so many idols ourselves, and why we uphold sometimes even the ones that harm our authenticity. For as much as we blame the Israelites in this story, as much as we pass judgment upon their fearful demands of Aaron, we are hardly less prone to worshiping idols of our own, familiar signs of worth and power, the correct way of existing in this world. Like the Israelites, we place our faith in structures that continually make our worthiness conditional on external measures, ones created to maintain a social hierarchy because they are familiar and safe. We place our faith in tangible symbols which take the place of the intangible towards which we profess to strive. Like the Israelites, we struggle to believe that the freedom we find in God's grace and abiding love is not going to be taken from us. That the image of the divine we carry, the most vulnerable sense of who we are, is a truer representation of God than the glittering golden image, tantalizing in its tangible, easy beauty. Like the Israelites, the idols we make reflect more clearly our fears than our faith. For though we may have been worshiping our God for a lot longer than the Israelites had, we have no more distance than they did between a dehumanizing culture in which we participate and the call of the God who values us as we are, rather than as potential creators of profit and power. We too still carry the symbols on our very bodies of a culture that continually demands more and suggests that our worthiness depends on our output or our conformity, leaving behind all of those whose lives cannot be made to benefit the powerful. We too still hold on to our idols rather than the values we would have them stand for, for we fear that self-examination would break down the facade that we have worked so hard to maintain, would make all that we love fall away from us. We too often choose familiarity over the wilderness into which God calls us, the unknown ways that make us anxious enough to reach for our gold, even when we long for the promised grace and justice to which our faith might yet lead us. We too often maintain our idols because the ramification of questioning this world's normal seems so much more real and frightening than the frustration of a God so easily evaded from punishment. We may have been worshiping our God for a lot longer than the Israelites, but we, like they, need the reminder that no matter the idol that we create, no matter the reason we give for its creation, no matter how much God grieves our idolatry, we will not be abandoned. We will remain beloved. We will receive God's grace and the chance to try again. Because it's been a long time since Moses calmed God's wrath, and we're still making golden calves in some way or another. And we're still being forgiven and called and loved. And really, I get it. It's hard to change. When you've been living into a rhythm of endless productivity, into a culture where certain lives matter more than others, into a culture that coerces a narrow view of normal and gaslights authentic living. Even dehumanizing systems such as this settle themselves within us, eat away at us until we believe in them, until the voice inside us whispers our unworthiness and fear erodes our soul, and the resultant anger sounds like the voice of the God whom we have created. And so we too need the reminder that while idols are known and comfortable, that courageous discomfort of self-examination will bring us deeper into relationship, not with the idols we have created and who look like us, who look like the things that we've been told to value, but with the God who created us in the image of the divine, who already knows all our deepest secrets, who already sees beyond our facade, and who loves us and who believes in us in ways we've long been told were impossible. We too need the reminder that the idols we have built can yet be destroyed. Even the idols that are so prevalent around us of whiteness and neuronormativity and capitalism and cis heteropatriarchy and all of the things, the toxic things that we're told are normal. All of that can be taken apart for the sake of the realm that God dreams for us. We too need the reminder that the possibility of following in the way of love and justice and freedom and peace is still within our grasp, even if it feels like we are walking into the wilderness. We too need the reminder that the God who caused mayhem, plagues, and crashing seas in protest of inhumane treatment is the God who does not demand that we exhaust ourselves, that we damage our inward being in order to become worthy. The God who is willing to make covenant even with such anxious creatures as we tend to be. That God, our God, will not abandon us, even in the wilderness, even before our idols, even when we are afraid. And we too need the reminder that this ancient word gives to us, that God is with us in our deepest selves, that our God will outlast and outlove any idol that we could build, that our God will call us again and again, not to create gods who look like us, but to look more and more like the God who created and who loves us all. Thanks be to God. Alleluia. Amen.